Open up your Bibles, if you would, to Ephesians chapter 6. We started last week with a series called Fight, just reminding us, man, that you and I, there is a spiritual battle that is going on. It is a fight. It is a fight that we're going through, and sometimes we have to be reminded of that. If we're not reminded of it, then we get mad at each other, and it affects our attitude and the way that we do things, and so it's a fight. And so we're going to talk some more today. And so even though we call the series Fight, kind of the subtitle or subplot is like what to do when your nose gets bloodied. And I've shared, when I was a kid, I was in my share of fights. And that time when in a fight, when your nose gets bloodied, is kind of that moment like, do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to keep this? It's that pivotal moment. Do I want to keep fighting? And you could be in that place right now in your own life personally, just in different areas in your life that you're in the middle of a fight, and maybe you're kind of at that bloodied nose moment where it's like, I want to keep this up. And so we're going to look at some things again this morning. We're going to keep on with this, and it's called How We Fight. How we fight. So number one is this, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. It says a final word, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies. Everybody say strategies. Of the devil, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. And so the word strategies there, it says a couple things. First of all, a strategy is intentional, isn't it? It's purposeful. It's not just kind of one of these things. It's not coincidental. It's directed personally. And so, one of the loose meanings of the word strategies that's used there could mean like on the road or the road to or something along those lines. In other words, that the devil's strategic in how he fights you and how he fights me. That there's certain areas that he'll hit us in our life. And the truth of the matter is because we all have different experiences, we have different personalities, we have different callings and those type of things, that we're not all necessarily vulnerable in the same areas. I mean, some areas we are, but there's things that I may struggle with personally that you may look at and go, I don't really deal with that. And there may be things that you struggle with that I could say the same thing. And so there are things that he'll hit you with that he wouldn't necessarily hit me with. But on the other hand, there's things he'll hit me with that he wouldn't hit you with because he's strategic in what he does. And that there's a road to that. There's a place that he wants to take us in that place. In other words, if we respond the way that he wants us to, then it takes us to a specific place. And so we have to understand this, that in the fight we're in, if you're taking notes, number one is this, is that the attack on you is strategic. It's strategic. It's intentional. Maybe he's dealing with you right now with your marriage, and the things that he tells you about your spouse, they're intentional. The things that he tells you about your marriage are intentional. Maybe you're struggling, as a parent, and the things that he tells you about your children, they're intentional. Maybe it's dealing with your past, about some mistakes that you've made, some sins you've committed, some things that have happened to you. And he's constantly bringing those things up and saying that because of this is what your future looks like. Again, it's strategic in what he does and in how he does it. He's very specific. And his goal is to get us to respond in such a way so that we get on the road to a certain place. He wants to take us to a certain place by getting us to respond to that. I mean, over and over again, we have fork in the road moments. Those fork in the road moments, that if we make that decision, if we make a decision to do this, then it takes us to this place. And if we make a decision to do this, it takes us to this place. I've shared with you my own story that many years ago, I was working at a ministry, just kind of figuring out what God wanted me to do. And that ministry didn't have a local church at the time. They were just ministering to the body of Christ. And they felt led to start a local church. Well, I was already going to a church and working there. And when they had the family meeting, they said, hey, if you're already going to a local church, we get it. You pray about whether or not you're going to do this. Okay, I'll do that. Well, that same day, the guy that had made the announcement pulls up and says, do you want to work with the teenagers or the singles? And I thought to myself, I guess my prayer has been answered. This is where I'm going to church. And so I go, teenagers? And he goes, okay. And he rolls up his window. It was that spiritual. Just that spiritual. The heavens opened. Angels began to sing. And I went, I'll work with the teenagers. No, it was not spiritual at all. It was like, it was just the first thing that popped out of my mouth. And it just seemed so insignificant, but it was a fork in the road moment. Little did I know that conversation, that seemingly insignificant moment was going to play such a huge role in my destiny, in the place that I went, and the direction that I went. It was a fork in the road moment. And so for you, you'll have those moments. On the other hand, I've had fork in the road moments that were presented to me, and I didn't make the right choice. Many years ago, in a situation, some things had happened, and I was just dealing with it, and it would happen again, and I was dealing with it. And eventually, I just got to a place where I got bitter. And bitterness is one of those things that doesn't stay stagnant. It just kind of grows, and at first, it grows underneath the surface. And a lot of times, you may be the one that knows it's there, and then every now and then it starts kind of showing up in passive-aggressive moments and little, just kind of snips and stuff like that. But it continues to grow until eventually it kind of breaks the surface of our private life, of our secret life, and begins to be a public thing and how we behave and what we do. Well, I'd had a fork in the road moment where I responded wrongly to an offense and to a hurt. And it took me to a place of bitterness which had horrible ramifications for me. And so for each one of us to understand this, that there's a fight that we're on, that you may be in the middle of it today. And let me just tell you this, that the devil's, he's not been coincidental in his attack on you. He's specific. That if there's a situation that he's trying to strike fear into your heart as a parent regarding your kids, that's intentional from him. That if he's trying to create a rift and animosity between you and your spouse, that's intentional. If he's trying to create, shame and condemnation because of decisions you made in your past, that's intentional. He's trying to get you to step back and to not move forward in the plan of God. And so for us to know this, that in this fight, to first of all know this, number one is that the attack on you is strategic, that it's purposeful and intentional. Look at number two, if you would, when we go to John chapter 8. John is still in the New Testament. It's the fourth book of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John was one of the disciples, one of the apostles. He was the oldest living of the apostles. Many scholars think he passed when he was in his 90s and started following Jesus in his late teens. A lot of times we don't realize that some of the apostles started at a young age. And so he probably started following him as a teenager and then lived to be in his 90s. He was the only one that wasn't martyred of the original, besides Judas who hung himself. So anyway, John chapter 8. Verse 42, Jesus is having a conversation with the Pharisees at this point, and they're mad at him, and it doesn't rock his world. I want to be more like that when people are mad that you're kind of like, wouldn't it be cool just to be like Jesus, we can respond this way, but he's Jesus. So, and I'm not. So here's the thing, is that in John chapter 8, as the conversation goes on in verse 42, it says, Jesus told them, if God were your father, you would love me. Because I have come to you from God. I am not here on my own, but he sent me. Why can't you understand what I am saying? It's because you can't even hear me. For you are the children of your father, the devil. Now, a lot of times people say, we're all children of God. Well, spiritually, that may not be true. If Jesus is not Lord of your life, you're not a child of God. And so he says right here, he was talking to these guys. He said, you're of your father, the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth. He has always hated the truth, and because there is no truth in him, when he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. He is a liar and the father of lies. And so one of his main weapons is the weapon of deceit. His main weapon is he likes to lie. And so he'll lie to you about what God thinks about you. He'll lie to you about what God thinks about your past. He'll lie to you about what God thinks about your present and your future. He'll lie to you about what God thinks about you and about your marriage and about your kids. He'll lie to you about all of those things. He is a liar. Again, I've said this before, that so many times in Hollywood, they picture, when the battle of God and the devil takes place, they have this picture of these two, powerful armies. Not even close. Not even close. It's a mismatch. It's a mismatch. It's so mismatched that the devil has to lie to even be effective in our world. He has to lie to you. He can't make you. He can't force you. He can't press you. He has to lie to you. He has to lie to me to get us to do whatever it is that he wants to do. We have to buy into that lie. It's what he does. It's stealthy. Now, as many of you know, I'm an OU fan. I do not apologize for that. And so I've been to a few of their national championships, and that I do apologize for because none of them have been good. And so several years ago, I went to the OU and Florida Orange Bowl game. And, it's in Florida. And after it was over, we lost. We felt like we should have won, which is typical. And so it was me, Pastor Swan and his brother, Stormy. And, so afterwards, we're leaving, just kind of minding our own business. And the Florida fans were pretty happy. They were celebrating. And there was one guy with a group of his friends. And he had some liquid courage that helped him celebrate. And so, we have our OU stuff on, so he kind of comes up and gives us the gator thing, and just kind of, it's very, and every fan base does that, and probably I've been that fan base before. But anyway, so here's the thing. So that's going on. We're frustrated, and he was like, and so Pastor Swan was like, hey, don't get in my face like that. And so the guy was like, so Pastor Swan grabs him. And so, yeah, and he was going to pray for him, I'm sure. So here's the thing. And so this would have been a good time for a voice of reason to put their hand on his shoulder and go, chill. But unfortunately, he didn't have a voice of reason behind him. He had me. And so I was standing next to him, and the guy was kind of standing there. He really didn't see me, and I had my fist doubled because I was getting ready to pop him right in the ear. I mean, I was going to like that. Now, we were outnumbered like 80-3. And I'm pretty sure after I did that, there was going to be a beatdown that hasn't been seen like that in a long time. They were going to beat the thunder out of us. But I knew when I hit that guy, they were going to have to tell him about it the next day. And so that was the one win. Well, fortunately, somebody else with a little more sense stepped up and goes, hey, let him go. So we walked out of there. But that guy would have had no idea what was coming at him. And the truth of the matter is that's what the enemy does to us sometimes, is that we don't see that it's him that's lying to us. We don't see that it's him that's put that thought there. We don't see that it's him that said to us what that person thinks about us. He's lying to us all the time. He lies to you about what people think about you. He lies to you about what God thinks about you. He lies to you about your future and about your past. He lies to you about your identity and about your worth. He's a liar. There is no truth in him. He's a liar. He always lies. And so in this fight, there's always deception. In this fight, there's always, and we'll talk about fear next week. We'll talk about the bully of fear next week. And I'd planned this before all this stuff had broken out, to get to the point of hysteria that it is now. But we'll talk about the bully of fear next week. And so, but the devil's a liar. He's a liar. And so just know this, that if you're in a fight right now, that if things around you feel chaotic, if peace is trying to elude you, just stop and ask yourself, what lies am I being told right now? I think it's interesting that in the Garden of Eden, that whenever God appeared to Adam after Adam and Eve had disobeyed God, and Adam said, man, we hid ourselves because we were naked and that type of thing, and God basically said, who told you that? Well, Pastor Rick, nobody likes me. I want to ask you what God asked Adam. Who told you that? Well, Pastor Rick, just my marriage, it's not going to make it. It's not going to work. Who told you that? Pastor, my kids are crazy. They're crazy. Hey, I'm a dad. At some point, all of our kids get crazy. It's contagious. And they're gonna be in trouble. Who told you that? Pastor Rick, I'm such a failure, man. I've made so many bad decisions, so many bad choices, and I feel like that I'm not gonna amount to anything. Who told you that? Pastor, nobody will ever love me. I'll never get married. Who told you that? And so over and over again in this fight, that the thing that we're battling is not this enemy that comes out and shows himself. He's one he's kind of behind the scenes. He's kind of in the shadows, and he lies to us. And one thing I like about Oklahoma is that you can fish. And I wonder, how many times that fish, he sees that bait and he just has to have it. And the minute he grabs hold of it and that hook sinks into him, how long does it take for regret to set in thinking, I wish I hadn't taken that? And so that bait, that lie that's thrown out there, that we have to look at and understand that the devil is a liar. There is no truth in him. There's no truth in him and what he says about you, about who God has made you to be, what future God has for you. There's no truth in him and how God feels about your past. That if you've asked God to forgive you and made Jesus Lord of your life, that the cross is greater than anything you or I could ever do. There's no truth in him and what God says about the call on your life. He's a liar. The devil's main weapon is deceit. Don't answer this out loud, but I just want to ask you, what lies are you listening to right now? Especially if you're in a fight. If there's a fight for your marriage, what lies are you listening to about your marriage? About your spouse? If there's a fight for your kids, what lies are you listening to about your kids? If there's a fight for your purpose, what lies are you listening to? If there's a fight for your identity, what lies are you listening to about that? Because if there's a fight, he's lying. If there's a fight, just know this, that the one that's creating the conflict, the one that's creating the adversity, the one that's creating the chaos, that in there somewhere, he's lying to you about something. Because he's a liar. And it's what he does. When our safe was stolen, it'd been so easy to get mad at somebody. Like, why would somebody do that? Somebody do that to a church or whatever. But I know the enemy. He's a liar. So he lied to them. And lied to them about what we think about him. The devil's main weapon is deceit. And so in this fight, we have to realize that's what we're fighting. He's the one we're fighting, and this is his weapon, is deceit. Let's look at number 3, and we'll close with this. Go with me, if you would, to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. You're in John, and so the next book over is Acts, and then Romans, and then 1 Corinthians, and then 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3. Says this: we are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. So we're human, but we don't wage war as humans. In other words, we don't fight like everybody else does. We use God's mighty weapons. Whose weapons? God's. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture the rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. So, we use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning. And so to win this fight that you're in, you have to use the right weapons. You know, the challenge for me is that sometimes, because the devil's key trick is adversity, is because is deception, that sometimes I've bought into, I've gotten baited into a situation and not realize that he's lied to me about something. And so I respond out of my own strength. I respond out of my own past, as opposed to using God's weapons. And all of a sudden I find myself in this conflict that peace is gone, and it's just created chaos, not just in my world, but also in my thought life. You know, and so many times they're weapons or tools that we were taught, that we grew up with. You know, sometimes when people get in adversity with somebody, their first response is the silent treatment. Now, do you think the silent treatment is a spiritual weapon? No. Some people respond with anger because they feel like that their anger keeps them safe. Some people, when they get in conflict, their rule is loudest one wins. And so we have all of these carnal weapons that we were given as children, that we've grown up with, that we've convinced ourselves it becomes our default because it feels safe to us. But in order to win this fight, we have to lay those weapons down and pick up these spiritual weapons that God's given us. You don't have to turn there, but we were there a few minutes ago in Ephesians 6. It says, put on every piece of God's armor so you'll be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then after the battle, you'll still be standing firm. You know, sometimes we're going through it and it's like, I don't want to fight. I just want to know how to avoid the fight. Die. What did you learn at church today? The preacher told me to die. No, I'm not telling you to die. But I am saying that you don't get to avoid it. That it's coming. And so we have to respond in a way. We have to trust God and believe God and surrender. We have to put on, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the belt of truth, the sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith, and shoes that are just the gospel, the preparation of the gospel of peace. Luke 6 says to love your enemies, bless those that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. Those are all spiritual weapons designed to win the battle so that when we fight, and even sometimes using those weapons, sometimes our nose gets bloodied. But after the battle, we're still standing firm. It's kind of like, you win. You win. And so in our battle, we have to understand that. Again, I'll read number 3. To win this fight, you have to use the right weapons. If you're in a battle right now, maybe it's a secret one. Maybe it's one that only you and God see. Maybe it's a private one. Maybe it's between you and your spouse, or you and just people that are in your very small circle. Or maybe in some elements it's public. And in doing this, it doesn't mean that we give the enemy his way just for peace. But in standing our ground, that we stand it the right way. What weapons are you using? How are you dealing with worry? Are you carrying it, which then makes you impatient with the people around you, which can make you a complainer or critical? Or you know what Philippians 4:6 says? Don't worry about anything, but in everything, with prayer and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes understanding, will keep your hearts and minds through faith in Christ Jesus. 1 Peter 5, casting all your care upon him, because he cares for you. That's your weapon. That's how you win this fight. And you have to stand your ground. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes for just a minute. And I want us to spend a moment with God and just let him just speak to you. Let the Spirit of God give you God thoughts. Just deal with your heart and just become vulnerable to him right now. Talk to him about what's really going on in your world and ask him to show you maybe some weapons that you've been using that aren't his weapons, that he's like, lay that down and pick this one up instead. Ask him to show you the lie that you've grabbed hold of, the one that you've bought into. Let the Spirit of God reveal that to you so that you know that's a lie. That's a lie. And it will lose its ability to impact. It will lose its power over your life once you recognize that it's a lie told by the liar. We're more than conquerors through him that loved us. And by using the weapons that God has given us, you can win the fight you're in. Let's just spend a moment with God and you just talk to him there in that secret place in your heart. Let him talk to you.